Hi, Vivian. Welcome to the Illuminate podcast, The Cast. We're so excited to have you on today's episode. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't wait to chat with you guys.
Yeah, us as well. So I'm just going to jump right into the first question then. Vivian, let's begin right from the start. Can you provide an overview of your educational journey and how it ultimately led to your role as a legal counsel at EY?
Yeah, so I'm happy to get into this. It's a bit of a long story, so feel free to jump in with like any questions in the middle if you want to. But from a really young age, I knew that I wanted to go to law school. So when I started my undergrad, I majored in political science, which is not that surprising for many other pre-law people or people who are considering law school. I think where things getting a little bit interesting on my path is in third or fourth year, I had gotten my application ready to go to law school. Like I wrote the LSAT, I got my references, I had lined everything up, but then I couldn't bite the bullet of actually applying. I'm a year younger just because of where my birthday falls. I realized that if I went straight to law school and I graduated, I would be a working professional at the age of 24. And, for some people, that's totally fine. And I think that's admirable. But for me, I felt like that was just so young. I didn't feel like I was ready to start my life at that point. I didn't really feel like I had a good understanding of what my value system was, what were the ways that I wanted to be contributing to work, what did I want my work to look like on the day to day. And so I ended up taking a year and I did my master's. So I enrolled in an MA from U of T. It's technically from the poli sci department, but it's a little bit more specialized. It's in political economy of international development, which is just like a fancy way of saying I studied development and politics. And I realized it was actually too hard for me to apply to law school and be in grad school at the same time. So that I did end up taking another year after that. But I did my master's, and it was very much like a year of exploration for me. Like, I don't know if it necessarily contributed to my professional career. I don't know if it's helped me get jobs or, increase my pay by any means. But I think it really gave me a foundation for understanding what it was and the type of work that I wanted to do. And at the time, it was I wanted to become involved in the process of like writing laws and changing laws and understanding how they work because through my master's, I came to have a respect for the law as sort of this catalyst of change within society. And so I actually started law school thinking that I was maybe not going to be a lawyer, but become like a public servant or go work for a public interest organization in some capacity. And that's sort of how I started law school. I went into law school very much being like, I don't even know if I'm going to be a lawyer, let alone like a corporate lawyer. But I think you have to be really open-minded to what you're presented with. So in my first year, I took all of my fundamental law courses. And the one that I loved the most was contract law. And I can't explain to you, I'm sure most people would find contracts to be incredibly boring, but I found them to be really interesting. And I really enjoyed the dynamic of that classroom and the aspects of you have to write stuff with such precision and little things like where you put the comma really matters. And like that sort of level of attention to detail really I found fascinating and inspiring, I guess. I went through the law firm recruitment process, and I actually ended up at a full service corporate firm. So we did business law primarily, and there I got exposure to lots of stuff. So like management side employment disputes. I handled, I worked on large bankruptcies. I worked on large transactions and financings and pieces of litigation. And at the end of that, I really fell in love with litigation. I got to go to my first trial. And again, a lot of it had to do with there's a certain level of precision in drafting when you're doing stuff like that. And even as a litigator, you fight over contracts. Like maybe I wasn't drafting them, but they were still very much part of my practice. And so I spent a couple of years doing civil litigation, and I had a very, very broad practice. I had lots of commercial disputes. I had continued employment issues. I still continue to work on bankruptcy stuff. But the one aspect of my practice that really, really developed was the regulatory side and supporting regulated professionals. So for me specifically, that meant that a big part of my practice was supporting doctors through meeting their obligations as a physician in terms of like, there's a regulator that tells them the stuff that you have to do in order to maintain your medical license. Similarly, there's another board that does that for accountants. So I was working very, very closely with these two groups of regulated professionals, and I found it to be really rewarding to get to work with people and to really support them in fulfilling their obligations. And that's sort of one of the downsides of being a litigator, is that people only come to you when there's already a problem, when they've already fallen short of their obligations and they've already made a mistake. And part of that job is you have to kind of clean that up. And that was the aspect of my job that I was less inclined for. So when this job popped up at EY, where it was just a purely regulatory job, it's just in the compliance and regulatory space, I sort of jumped on the opportunity. And I do think, having experience working with regulated professionals for so long was something that really helped me. Like, I could leverage that as experiences that I had to get this job, but like never, when I started law school, I did not think that I was going to be a lawyer, let alone like a regulatory lawyer. So the road has been quite long. And I think, much like many other people, my career and my path have sort of been a combination of shoring up my skills as best as I can and then taking whatever opportunities come my way. So that's how I ended up at EY and in-house
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, it's very interesting though. I noticed at one point you mentioned taking a contract law course and surprisingly finding it very interesting. And I have the same experience as well at Western. I was shocked to find it so interesting, but it is a really interesting concept. So I agree with you on that. And thank you for bringing us along with that journey. And now that we know what led you to your current role at EY, our next question is whether you can share some insights into the responsibilities and day-to-day activities involved at your current role working as a legal counsel at a business firm.
Yeah, I do want to preface this with like the legal team at EY is quite large. I think there's somewhere between like 20 to 30 of us. And so our group is very specialized. We continue to have litigators, we have employment specialists, we have contract specialists. My job specifically is just in regulatory compliance. And so what that means is whenever any aspect of the business has a question about, can I do this thing? Is this thing legal? Am I even allowed to do this thing as an accountant? Those types of questions pop up and they end up on my desk. And so my job is very much understanding the business, understanding their needs and their goals, but then also understanding how that fits into a much larger regulatory system. So we, as accountants, our practice is regulated not only provincially by the CPA of Ontario, but we also have all of the other provincial regulators. So the equivalent in Quebec and in BC and in Alberta. But on top of that, we have a Canadian federal regulator as well. And then, of course, there are occasionally cross-border issues because EY is an international company. A very interesting question that comes up is sanctions, for instance. We can do what we can to be compliant in Canada, but the standards for compliance in Canada versus the US versus the EU versus the UK are all different. And it's important that we're able to get some sort of consistency between that. So in scenarios like that, the job is not only just advising the business, but it's also setting the standards for how we want to conduct our business, implementing a process that allows us to be compliant across multiple jurisdictions. And oftentimes that means we have to work with each other, work with lawyers who are in different specialties. And so I would say like a good way to summarize the job is basically like when they have a question, you research and you advise. So a lot of the job is being an advisor to the company and helping them troubleshoot issues. And again, it is really rewarding because they'll come to you and they're like, we have this great idea, we want to implement it, we think it would be good for the business. What are the things that we need to be worried about? And the great part about this job is, as opposed to being a litigator where something has already gone wrong and you're trying to clean up the mess, I'm really in a position to give the business good advice, add value to their projects by ensuring that what they're doing remains compliant and, totally within the lines of what's good.
Yeah, definitely. I love that you're passionate about making sure that you can actually help the business when it's not too late already. And I really like that another aspect of your job is dealing with different problems every day. And it sort of must keep it interesting. I can imagine that's something I would hope for myself in my future too. So thank you for answering that question. And I'm going to pass it off to Crystal to ask you the next few questions moving forward.
So hi, Vivian. I'm so excited for you to join us today. My question is a bit similar to what Sophie just mentioned. So from your experience, what are some fulfilling aspects of practicing as a legal counsel?
The most fulfilling is being trusted. Sometimes you give people advice and they don't listen to you or they're not sure if they can listen to you. And I feel like the nice thing about being in this position is by default, I feel like the company has put some trust into you. And The nice thing about that is it gives you an opportunity to really add value to projects. The reason I like being in-house more than I've liked my other legal jobs are very much down to those two things. When you're in-house, people are upset, there are feelings to be managed. You're sort of just trying to make the best situation out of, whatever has been handed to you. And a lot of that times it means wrangling in difficult people, and it's a little bit more hostile, I would say. Whereas, I would say the great thing about this job is that people are not hostile towards you giving them opinions or telling them what to do. In this job, for the most part, when you tell someone what to do, they're able to make that decision, right? It's very, very rare that we sit down here at the company and are like, you have to do X. There are obvious laws that we have to be compliant with. Yes, that's the answer. But a lot of the times, the answer is, this is a bit risky. It's a bit of a gray area. We don't have clear guidance on this. Here would be the risks that are involved. Here are ways to mitigate that risk. And then you can make a business decision about how much risk you are willing to accept. Being in that position, I feel like gives you a lot of opportunity for you to flag issues that they hadn't even thought about before. Someone came to me the other day with a question about, can we hire this person? And just because I have experience in this space, I could be like, yes, you can hire the person, but the actual issue that you're running into is you won't be able to pay them under these regulations. So being able to help people find problems that they didn't even know existed and get in front of them before they become a real issue for the organization, it feels so rewarding to feel like you have expertise, you can contribute them to a project, and that people are receptive to those things. And I think that's part of what makes the culture here really great, because I do think that that's an aspect of the legal job. I've worked at other companies before where I've been like, this is my legal opinion and people don't care. That's not a great situation to be in. So I'm really grateful that I get to work at a company that does respect the law and for the most part does try to be compliant with it. And it makes my job a lot more value added and supportive than it does make it like babysitting or aggressive.
For sure. And then something I learned in political economics was that preventative measures always yield better results than curative measures. So my next question to you is similar. You operate in a rapidly changing legal landscape. So how do you stay abreast of the evolving regulatory environment, and what are some resources and strategies you rely on to ensure your knowledge stays up to date?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. Part of it is just, it's very boring. Part of it is just I read. I am subscribed to a lot of newsletters. A lot of the law firms are really good at generating updates on when stuff comes out because law firms want to position themselves as having expertise in the area. And so honestly, I subscribe to a ton of updates. Like I have one firm where every month they send out a list of every single regulation and law that's changed in Canada. And at the end of the month, I open it up and I sit there and I scroll through it and I say, which regulations are particularly relevant to our entity? And I take a quick look at the changes. Are these material? Do these impact us? And that's like the nitty gritty aspect of it. But there's also more fun ways of staying attuned of things too. Like I go to a lot of seminars, I attend a lot of conferences. Whenever there are changes in legislation, lots of people will host events to discuss those changes and discuss the impact that those have to various businesses. And so I love to be able to attend those and to discuss it with others. But a lot of it is just how you would stay up to date with the news, right? You read updates, you know the people who are publishing and writing on these topics, you subscribe to them and you just keep seeing and you do your best to stay on top of things. EY is so phenomenal at supporting us in our education. Whenever there are sessions that are useful, they tend to sign us up as a group. They flag a lot of them for us. So a lot of that stuff comes on my radar just through my job. Ontario Reports publishes a newspaper every single week. And in there, they report key decisions, they have job postings. And I make it a habit to read a lot of those things, not only just to stay on top of the regulatory issues within the job itself, but also to stay on top of changes within the profession. Because a lot of the standards within how we practice and how we're expected to behave and do sort of such and such, those things are constantly changing as well. So
sure, our listeners will benefit from that advice. So on a similar note, what skills would you recommend for students who are interested in pursuing a career in your field? And are there any particular skills you think they should start developing early on?
yeah, I mean, it's really boring, the skills that I would encourage people to work on, but things like have attention to detail. Like no matter what area of law you work in, whether you're a negotiator or you go to court or you're an employment lawyer, attention to detail is key, right? I would also say you have to have strong organization skills. When I was in private practice, I had 60 different files, which means that at any point there could be various deadlines, and having a system where you can bring stuff forward, follow up on them, make sure nothing is falling through the cracks. You have a strong to-do list where you're able to get everything in on time. They help with my time management, staying on top of my schedule. It's silly, but honestly, attention to detail and being organized will get you so far, not only in this job, but in a ton of jobs. And I also think a lot of the job is learning to manage people. And I mean that on like every level. You have to manage your own assistants most of the time and your own clerks who support you on your files, but you also need to manage up towards your partners because they're so busy and they give you half-baked assignments that they thought of while they were cleaning their baby's diaper or whatever. And so a lot of the job is learning to manage these other people. Now that I've gone in-house, I still have that relationship where like I have to manage up. And when I get an assignment, it's my job to ask the appropriate questions around context. Like, how does this person like to work? What are the best ways that I can serve them? And you have to adapt that to the different people you're working with. I think when you're young, getting experience in leadership, getting experience working with people in different working dynamics so that you can really flesh out those people management skills. I think they're a softer skill that goes under the radar a little bit, but I think that especially in law, when things get contentious or when things get really stressful, what you really need is someone who can show up and make you feel like they've got everything under control, right? I feel like that's a big part about being a lawyer. And a lot of that comes down to the way that you interact with others. And so I think building out those social skills is always really key. And I think that goes a little bit understated. I feel like everyone who goes to law school is like, I am good at school and I have good time management skills. Hopefully you are also detail oriented and organized and good at managing your time. But like aside from all of those things, I think a really important thing once you get into the job is being able to be likable and to be someone that people want to work with, especially when some firms you're working like 80 hours, 100 hours a week. A lot of the interview process is less about, are you amazing at control Fing this one term and rechanging? No, like the skill is low. What they really want to know is if it's 3 a.m., you've been at this for a couple of days and you're in a boardroom and something goes wrong, are you the type of person that they want to be in a room with in that moment? You can get pretty far into the process. Like you can get into law school, you can get great marks, but in terms of like getting into the workforce and becoming a good lawyer, I think that those are really undersold skills in the field.
So when I think about lawyers, I think they're super independent, but it sounds like a lot of teamwork is required to make sure everything goes well. So my last question to you before I pass the mic back to Sophie is, looking ahead, what do you perceive as certain future trends and opportunities in the field of business law? And how can students and aspiring lawyers position themselves to take advantage of these trends?
Yeah, I thought long and hard about this. Unfortunately, I think my answer is a bit cliche. I think the biggest trend that we're seeing in the law right now is the development of new technology and AI. Our field is changing so quickly. I think personal injury and wrongful dismissal, you can just plug things into a little sheet and hit enter and it'll generate the amount of money the file is worth. There's so much AI technology that's now available to lawyers. The older generations are obviously not very good at keeping up with this. So I think when you're young, learn as much as you can, be open to it, be adaptable. A word that comes up at work a lot of the time is being agile. So being able to change your plan last minute and adapt to what's coming up. And I think with respect to technology, that'll take you so far. I had an assignment recently where my job was to figure out what changes have happened within these laws and whether or not we needed to update our own policies to reflect those changes. And so I went onto the website and I found a little button that I could click that would compare the current version to previous versions. And then just by clicking this button, I could very quickly skim to see what the differences are. So this made the project go a lot faster. And then I brought it up in the team meeting. Everyone was like, oh my God, you're amazing. I can't believe you were able to blackline legislation. Like, wow, I wouldn't be able to do that. I got a lot of credit there for understanding technology. It wasn't a difficult thing for me to do. But it was just, I understand tech a little bit better. I've been trained in legal research, maybe a little bit more recently than some of these other people have. And so it just allowed me to be a little bit more on the ball about these things. And it saved me a ton of time. It saved the firm a ton of time, and it made me look good. And it was a very, very small thing, right? As cheesy it is, embrace technology. When ChatGPT got big, I was sort of like, I don't know how I feel about this. But then I was like, you know what? I should try it. And it's amazing. It's so good for helping you draft. You obviously can't put private and sensitive information in there, but it can help you politely draft an email and how to tell someone to leave you alone. You know what I mean? Little things like that you would agonize over, that you would spend a lot of time as a junior trying to figure out the right tone to master. Like, rely on technology for those things. Like, wherever you can, do not be afraid to embrace technology and, see the way that it can change your practice. Obviously you have to be careful. If you're building new tech into your practice, make sure you're running it by your entity, make sure that it's got the appropriate security, because a lot of the times we deal with really confidential information. I can't just download Grammarly onto my computer because I don't know if it's storing the drafts of what I do. When you make decisions like that, you have to run them by your company or whatever. But to the extent that you are able to, I would highly encourage people to be very open and to try to stay educated about tech as it comes out, because it's constantly changing. And I think even the rise of social media platforms like TikTok, I feel like people think of as teeny boppers doing dances. But I'm on TikTok and there's tons of educational information on there. There's a lot of lawyers on there. There's a lot of people who are providing insights into their lives, into their practices. And I feel like little things like that can help companies and to help people stay ahead of the curve and to make themselves stand out. And a big difference is just being willing to accept that change and be a part of that change instead of being left behind by it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that about technology. So for the last few questions, I'm going to pass the mic back to Sophie.
Thank you, Crystal, and thank you, Vivian, for sharing about your insight on maybe how slowly the law industry has moved in the past, and then in the future, how quickly it's about to change. And it's great insight to provide to youth on how to take advantage of that ever-changing industry and how technology is playing into that as well. So my last question for you today, Vivian, if you could look into your history and offer advice to your younger self when you were starting out, what guidance would you provide? And is there anything that you wish you had known or done differently in your career history?
Yeah, this is a bit harsh, but I think the thing I would tell myself is that you need to be more selfish. You need to be your own advocate. As much as a company is approaching you or they're nice to you or they seem really sweet, HR is not your friend. HR is there to manage you on behalf of the company. And I feel lucky in the sense that I've always worked for good organizations that I do feel have cared about me as a person. And I've never felt super screwed over by my job. But I think that is partially luck. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I go into these conversations super earnestly. And that is something that I won't be doing moving forward. It's less because I have a regret about it, because my life ended up fine. But I have seen so many other people get completely screwed over by their jobs. You try so hard to play by these rules that you think are in place. A good thing to think about is when you quit a job, you feel so bad about it. You feel so guilty. And you're I have to make sure I give them enough notice. I have to make sure I cover all of my files. But if this company was trying to fire you, I don't know how much they would think about your life and how much the firing would impact you. That's the thing that I think I need to work on, and the thing that I also would encourage younger individuals who are about to join the workforce, about to go through these crazy recruitment processes, and especially young women. I think the lesson is, I think you have to be selfish, have your own interests, because no one else will. No one else is going to fight for you the way that you're going to fight for yourself. If you find other people who are going to go to bat for you, that's amazing and that's great. And that definitely happens all the time. I don't want to make it seem like it's a cold, cold world out there, because it's not. I have really wonderful mentors and I've really benefited from that. But I also feel like I perhaps was a bit too honest and earnest earlier in my career. And I wish that I had had my guard up a little bit more.
Yeah, definitely. It's a hard question to answer for sure, because you don't want to label anything in your history as a regret because it got to where you are today. but it's definitely important to look back and provide insight to youth as what they can do in the future. And I definitely relate to the advice you've given as well as a woman, and feeling like you might owe that to companies when it's really not the case. So thank you for providing that really insightful feedback. And that concludes our last podcast question for you today, Vivian. So thank you so much for your time. I've personally really enjoyed this podcast, and thank you so much for coming on.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to chat.